So many of you are so in touch, but something that I'm about to be faculty for is the contemplative based resilience program that comes out of the Garrison Institute, which offers a lot of mind body contemplative practices to really support the well being of others. What I love about it as a trained neuroscientist is that it has some really great, tools that are really based on evidence and science. And also, like this vocational calling that I feel, I did this a lot when I was a professor, but how can we just kind of help others um, be well to serve well as be able to kind of constantly develop our self regulation skills so we are better able to connect with that. And we know that, post-traumatic growth is something that is so important to lead to it, coming from the field of the neuroscience of, post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and anxiety. It's really important to learn how those work. But it's also important to learn like some of the beautiful gifts that can come from intense hardships. But also, as I'll unpack in this a little bit, as not as an excuse to kind of like not interrupt these systems that are causing us so much harm, but rather like help us build community and community support around dismantling these systems. And of course, learning about trauma and how it impacts our bodies and our brains, our emotions, our behaviors, our relationships can better understand ourselves and how others operate. And I'm realizing that I'm really having to continue to strengthen and cultivate these skills as we're heading into a really brutal election season. And, it's always just such a divisive and tenuous time, especially what's happening in some of the states where, yeah, some of the work around equity and justice are literally illegal in some places. And of course, it's so important just to have trauma-informed therapists. We know that it's not helpful just to debrief these traumatic incidents without like guided facilitation. Otherwise, that can actually lead to more PTSD. We love emotions, right? They come in a huge variety of flavors, and we're often taught they've evolved to kind of disrupt cool collective thinking and being rational and to problem solve. But we now know emotions have really evolved to teach us the people, the places, the things that have brought us well-being, those that have brought us harm. For academic trauma, it's basically an emotional response to a terrible event. This is just, a working definition from the American Psychological Association. But we're so passionate about intersectional academic trauma, understanding that we are navigating these systems. They're not broken systems. They're systems that have working as they were designed to really support. They were very much designed for cis het white men, right? And so many of us who identify as women, BIPOC, queer and trans, if we're living with disabilities, we're often navigating these dominant spaces that were not meant for us. And it can often feel very traumatic just to navigate these spaces, especially if you are a leader in EDI and pointing out different problems of the institution. And oftentimes that can lead to some things related to gaslighting, retaliation, um, and isolation and all those things. As we all know, and many of us may be coming from a very difficult meeting, oftentimes we're in shock and we don't believe that happens. And as Tiffany and I discussed, sometimes we're almost in like, I'm just being overly sensitive, or they didn't really mean that. But something that we want to convey to you is how important it is to listen to your body. Once you do that work around equity and justice, because I remember as a young person growing up in a conservative household, listening to my body, I didn't understand how all these systems of oppression, especially systemic racism, has disproportionately impacted people in so many ways. So a lot of these things about sharing and resources may not be apparent to those who come from less progressive backgrounds. But when you do the work and you dive in and you do the science and you just know in your body what's right and unfair and unjust, you need to listen to that and honor your inner wisdom when you're helping yourself and other people. We know that trauma can come in so many variations, especially when we're navigating academia. whether it's just like an acute episode, like a microaggression, or some of the stuff that, Tiffany bravely unpacked in her piece. As well as sometimes it can be very vicarious. And I experienced this as an editor for the journal and was like, wow, I really know exactly what's coming up for that person. And so it's been an honor to kind of hold space and give you many of you the platform to share your stories. But now we want to give you the opportunity to heal and process. We all know how stress impacts our bodies in very universal and unique ways. And so, as I'm talking, if any you react to anything or want to share anything about how you're impacted, you're welcome to do so, but you're also welcome to you do you, and you can also just not put anything in the chat. I personally get kind of the classics with right the shoulder and the neck. Now that I'm getting older, I feel a lot more wear and tear in my heart, and a lot of my, a lot of my systems related to my viscera. We all know how powerful the autonomic nervous system is in regulating how our minds really are connected to our bodies and how our bodies keep score of our trauma and often will send some things to the brain. Oftentimes it can be very unconscious, but once we kind of hone our bodily wisdom or somatic wisdom, it's a really beautiful guide to help us kind of illuminate the way of how to proceed in a situation. I often would tell my students that existential crises are good for the soul. I'm having one this week. I like to have one every other month if possible, just to re-examine my life course and what I should be doing with my life. But it's also important when you're feeling like something's not right. It might be time to revisit your situation, renegotiate your path within that institution, or find a way to be your full authentic self in another space. Or as Tiffany, we might unpack in the Q&A, sometimes you can almost choose your own adventure and find what feeds your soul, fills your cup, and figure out a way to do that either within the space that you're in or in other spaces as well. This is just a nerdy slide from my background about how the body connects to the brain and the brain connects back up into the body. And of course, we have these systems in our brain, especially like threat detection with the amygdala, absorbing all of that emotional information around threat and making all of these new synapses. So we're basically overreactive, and that's evolutionarily adaptive, right? If you have been caused harm, and sometimes as we talk about intergenerational trauma, if something happened to your ancestors too, it's important to be constantly guarded and and vigilant. But at the same time, if we've been through a lot of trauma, we are going to be more reactive in our brain. And it can also make it really hard to focus on things that involve concentration and learning and memory, especially when we're in a system that doesn't feel very supportive or nourishing as well. And so a lot of this stress can really allow us to kind of sink into kind of the weeds of our despair. Do I have the affinity here? I didn't. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about how we can strengthen our resilience and our physiological and psychological resilience by honing our pro-social nervous system, which has really evolved to be intrinsically rewarding, to be a good person, and also what's good for others is also good for you. It is intrinsically rewarding to be pro-social and kind and supportive and a good mentor and listening to your body. I'm just going to go ahead and go through these quickly so we have time for a quick meditation and hopefully some time for some discussion at the end. Um, you know, I'm on this mission to reclaim and redefine resilience because I stopped using it in my vocabulary. I was giving a lot of workshops in the neuroscience of resilience, but people have been used to weaponize it as almost an excuse not to examine these systems and structures that have caused so much harm, especially to women and cutie BIPOC. And oftentimes we think of this, and I love this piece from Lord's Dolores Fallons around how, you know, especially for a Black person, especially Black women, sometimes these are remnants left over from slavery and colonization and indentured servitude, and treating people as subhuman and denying them of their dignity and their humanity. And so oftentimes, what I'll just kind of end with for this section is um, how important it is to constantly check in with yourself. It is so easy to be caught in the weeds of despair. Believe me, we all know how it is. And I have a lot of defaults, especially around, depression and catastrophizing. But if we develop our self-regulation skills, it allows us to get in touch with our common humanity so that we're able to kind of be well to serve well and to look out for others and to be great mentors, and also to allow ourselves, no matter how much older we get, to be co-mentored, especially by those younger than us, so that we can do right by them to navigate these systems of harm. And so, these tools kind of help you kind of get out of that ditch, those self narratives where you feel like no one can possibly understand what you're going through, to get in touch with what millions, if not billions, have experienced, especially those who have been left out. Even if you're part of the global majority, here, especially in the United States, we can often feel very minoritized and marginalized. And so how can we kind of tap into that common humanity, so that we can have compassion, not just for ourselves, but for others? So I'm going to go ahead and zoom ahead to a rain meditation of self-compassion. And I'll just invite you all to you do you for this section. It's always helpful to either close your eyes or just to stare at this screen or something ahead of you, just because, our visual cortex, as many of you know, is constantly like, what am I seeing? What am I reading? All the things. And so sometimes it's nice to give your brain a break. Even my kiddos in elementary school get these brain breaks so they have time to just center in and be grounded. What's beautiful about these tools, they can be very quick and easy. You don't necessarily have to go to a week-long silent meditation retreat, although I highly recommend them. But once you build like your mindfulness muscles, you can just tap in and sometimes self-regulate, even if you have nowhere else to go except for a closet or a bathroom stall and things like that. So I'm going to do a very brief rain meditation of self-compassion from Tara Brake that's adapted for those of us who've experienced academic trauma. So the R from rain, and rain gets a bad rap, but me coming from the Pacific Northwest, I love rain. It settles the dust. It's very cleansing. It nurtures all the plants and the foliage and the trees. And so a way to kind of embrace rain, especially in these hot summer days where I find myself craving for rain. The R for the rain is to recognize what you're feeling or thinking. What's going on? What's consciously acknowledging it in any given moment, the feelings, the thoughts, the behaviors that are affecting us. And like awakening from a dream, oftentimes we get in this trance of unworthiness. Imposter syndrome is not our failing, it is the structural failings of these systems that have been built to make us feel like we don't belong. So how do we foster our sense of belongingness? By kind of disrupting that self-narrative we might have about how we're unworthy, that we're an imposter, that we're not deserving. And so just to be able to recognize what's going on and notice when you're in that trance and that inner critical voice is coming in, how can we just gently disrupt that? The A for the rain is acknowledging, accepting, or allow. Just to pause with intention. Just let those thoughts, emotions, feelings, sensations just be there. We're often caught in self-judgment. We are naturally designed to do so, especially those of us who are a part of intersectional feminism, where we're navigating these patriarchal spaces that are often kind of making us full of self-doubt. So how do we not kind of like make our own self-judgment be a part of that narrative. And oftentimes we can interrupt there just very gently. Some of us might need, don't slap yourself in the face, but just a gentle whisper, right? That you are worthy. It's okay. And it's natural to feel this way. The eyes to investigate with kindness, self-kindness. What part of yourself needs the most attention right now? How do we pause with intention, investigate the kindness, and just see what you need right now? And notice and listen to your inner wisdom in your body. And finally, the N is for nurture. Listen to what that tender, hurting part of you needs. Self-compassion is really not about self-esteem, um, but oftentimes it's just being able to calm that part of yourself that feels frightened and wounded and tender, to give it what it might need in any given moment. Sometimes it's a message of reassurance. Sometimes it's forgiveness and cutting yourself some slack. Sometimes it's just some company. And we're here to give you company because it's so easy to feel so isolated and alone in this work. Also, just about giving yourself a sense of gratitude and self-love